about the origins of Buddhism and why we do this sitting practice, and then actually give instructions as to how to do it, to do that well enough so you can take it home and do it, or show up at the Buddhist center or come somewhere else and be able to sit. So first we have the story. So there was a man in India 2,500 years ago or thereabouts, Siddhartha Gautama. He was born in northern India. His father was the king of a small, I don't know, it seems like it's a large tribe. King seems a little overblown, but they were certainly wealthy. And when he was born, his parents sent for astrologers, and the astrologers said, this young man will either be a very great king or he will be the Buddha, the great spiritual teacher. So the king tried to prevent him from becoming interested in spiritual life because he wanted him to, take over the kingdom. So his life was protected. All the people he saw were young and attractive. He had, of course, plenty of food and good things, but he didn't know much of anything about the world outside of him. And one day, he left the palace grounds. I forget how this happened. And Chandra, his clearly a friend, but his charioteer, went with him. And so they went out through the town and they saw a sick person who was very sick, covered with sores and, looking kind of awful. And Siddhartha said, what's that? And Chandra said, that's a sick person. Everybody gets sick, you and me too. They saw, stories differ, a funeral or a corpse. And Siddhartha said, what's that? And Chandra said, people die. Everybody dies. You too. I'm missing one. Don, can you help me? Oh, an old person. Somebody who was just so old that, they're really decrepit, going along with the cane and stuff. And again, what's that? Because he hadn't seen that. And it's like, this happens to everyone. And then the last vision was of a monk, a mendicant. And it was traditional at that time for people, after they had finished raising their families, and I assume this was, middle-class people, that you might become a seeker and turn your attention to the spiritual life. And the way you did this was to change your clothes and go and become homeless and beg for food. And people would give you food. And it was a standard path once one was old. And so they came across one of these people. And the Buddha asked, and Chandra answered. And so a young man whose whole life had been protected suddenly saw death, impermanence, suffering, misery, and a spiritual way to live. And he was quite disturbed. And he made up his mind that he needed to understand what caused these things. He had recently married. His wife either was about to or had given birth to a son. But anyway, she had given birth by the time he actually left the palace. Or he was a little confined. They wanted him to stay home, study the stuff he was supposed to study, and become a king. There are different stories about this. The usual story says he snuck off in the middle of the night. But there is another story in which he and his wife had conversations and agreed that he was going to do this and she was fine with it. And of course, she and the baby were going to be fine. And they later joined his community after he had done what he needed to do. But so he took off. He traded his clothes with a beggar, so we'd have appropriate clothes. He sent the horse back. I think Chandra accompanied him, and then he sent him back. And Chandra kind of wanted to go with him, but he wouldn't let him. And so he went to pursue the spiritual life, sometimes called the holy life. And his question was, how can we be free from suffering? He studied with two of the great teachers of his day for several years each. And in each case, he was invited, he learned everything that teacher had to know, and he was invited to teach alongside of him or to replace him as teacher. And he considered it, and he thought, well, I still don't have freedom from suffering. And so he turned them down. He tried asceticism. He tried eating just a few grains of rice a day. Oh, he was hanging out with a group, about 6 other men who were, following, supporting, encouraging, and trying to do the same thing. And so there's this theory that all suffering is a result of physical desires. And so you try to starve the body, and then you won't have any desires, and then you won't have suffering. And he basically determined that it just didn't work. And he made remarks later on when he started teaching that both the path of indulgence it just wasn't any good, and the path of asceticism also wasn't, and there had to be a middle path. So he was trying to figure out what might be, and he remembered a time when he was a boy, 10 or 11 years old, and his father was plowing the fields. Some people say he was doing the ritual opening of the fields that the king always did in the spring. Some people say they called him a king, but he still had to plow the fields. I don't know if there's a way to find out. But anyway, his father was plowing the fields. He was sitting under a tree and kind of not doing anything. And it was a very pleasant and peaceful state of being. So he's wondering what to do, and he remembers that time, and he thinks, maybe that's the answer. And I'm sure this is about intuition. He says, yeah, that's the answer. I'm going to do that. And he's clearly very dedicated. And he said, I'm going to do this until I get it. I won't get up until it's clear to me. But first he needed some food. He took something referred to as milk rice from a passing, a young woman who was tending cows. Anyway, he did that. He got some bodily sustenance. He found a tree, sat down under it, and didn't move. And then you have all these stories about what happened, how long he was there. I mostly have heard 7 days, but some stories make it much longer. And then there's a story of a night in which he had all kinds of visions. Mara, who was sort of like the devil, came and tempted him and said, I'll make you a ruler. And he also tempted him. He showed him women. He tried everything, possessions, fame, power, sex. And also insults, and that, tried to ruin his confidence. There's a point in there where the Buddha put his hand on the earth and said, "The earth is my witness." So he was confident that what he was doing was exactly what he needed to do. And there's something about that confidence. It's recommended when you read teachings, and I'll come back to that, I think. Anyway, so, he remembered his past lives, all kinds of things. And on the last night, with the morning star, he woke up and he said, they say he said, "House builder, I see you now. Your rafter is broken. You shall not build this house again." This was his declaration of independence from the cycle of suffering. And so he was free. He also wasn't quite sure what to do. First he thought, well, I don't know how to explain this, so maybe I won't. And the gods came and begged him, please talk about it. There will be some people who have just a little dust in their eyes, and you can help them. So I said, okay. And he remembered his teachers. First the one, I will go and tell him about this. He'll be interested. Turned out he had died. Then the other teacher, I'll go and tell him. He had died. And so he went, well, the monks, the seekers who were practicing with me, I'll go and tell them. And so he went back to the park where they were practicing, and they were still there. They saw him coming, and they said to themselves, he's eating, he's talking with women, we should turn our backs and not have anything to do with him. But he had such a presence that they couldn't do it. And so he came and preached his first sermon, which is called Setting Rolling the Wheel of the Law. And in it, he gave the basic sense of things that he had seen. It was about how we come to have suffering, how we can be free of it, the Eightfold Noble Path, and some remarks, like I said, that asceticism was really not good, and that indulgence was not good either. And so this original talk is kind of like, here's the direction. And one of them, now I don't remember, what I remember from that story is him saying, Khandana knows. One of them got it right away. As soon as he had preached his sermon, Khandana got it. And the Buddha said, he's got it. But within a few days, all of those were awakened. And then they wandered around India, begging for food and giving teachings. And he accumulated hundreds of followers and thousands of followers, and rich people who gave him land and money for monasteries and places. So that the monks and nuns would have a place to stay so they wouldn't trample the fields during the rainy season. There had been a complaint. Anyway, so that's the origin story. And it goes back to, there's lots more, of course, but it goes back to that, I was just sitting there and I felt kind of peaceful. And maybe that's the path to the end of suffering, or to freedom from suffering. It's not literally the end of suffering. And I will pause for questions if anybody wants to ask.
Shodo, you said something like asceticism? I didn't understand the word.
Oh, asceticism.
Asceticism. Okay, got it. All right, I missed that.
Okay, yeah, not sleeping, not eating, not all that stuff.
Okay, I heard something slightly different. I thought,
Whoops.
what was that? Okay,
Okay.
thank
Good.
you.
Thanks for asking.
I'm unmuting myself. I think maybe it has always been a thing to think about the desire and not desire, and finding a balance, you know, for ending suffering. So in a way, what you're saying is that Zen practice or Buddhism isn't an ascetic life necessarily. It's not an indulgent life. It's in between. And is it true that we all find our own balance? Is that?
Yes. So it's interesting because I remember somebody stopping in at my apartment when I was studying at Sanshinji with my teacher. And I had a studio apartment, and they looked around and they said, are you a monk or something? And I was thinking, my apartment was so full of stuff. It was so indulgent. They should have seen Shoryu's apartment. His apartment looked monastic. You know, bare walls, bare everything. I had, yeah. So it's all a matter of perspective. And now I'm very much a householder. I have the farm. I want people to come and live with me. And so I collect tools and I collect books and things. But also I've been doing this so long that I kind of forget about things like, oh, processed food. I mean, conveniences and makeup. Well, I was already done with makeup, but you know, I mean, there's a whole life that I've just kind of forgotten. And different people, like it's unusual in America for women to shave their heads. And there's complex women priests, I mean, and there are a set of reasons why I do that. But we pretty much choose how we're going to live and how we're going to present the Dharma. But everybody who has come to this place in the Zen life has to be thinking about how they're going to present the Dharma. And so when you look at me, you see something that's a little extreme because I'm there, but you see, you know, a person who's a householder, a lay person. There are all a whole range of ways that they may live, and they may be living in a way that somebody else would think was ascetic, very simply. Or they may live luxuriously, and people find their own balance.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It was said to me by Reb Anderson, who's a teacher at San Francisco, that there's a matter of thinking that things will make you happy. And like to study, like to become his formal student, you had to have gotten over that idea. It's not true, and it's a very common idea.
It is, and as an artist or somebody who, you know, creates stuff, I also have stuff to make stuff, and it just feels sometimes kind of a burden, and I know that it's part of who I am. I just love material, you know, and but I think that I'm in the place now. Don't feel ancient, but I'm, you know, 64, and I'm just looking at letting go of more stuff, and I think that'll help my mind and be more present as well. But it's a matter of doing it, you know, letting go.
Yeah.
I don't want to dominate this.
It's okay. We'll get. It's like I have to do how to sit instructions, but I will just say that there's a matter of paying attention to how you are with things. So I've given away things that I shouldn't have because I was trying to simplify my life. And then it was like, oh, I actually needed that. Or, oh, that had an emotional content because of the person who gave it to me. Whoops.
Yeah.
And there is, I mean, and you can find it in Zen. There's a, oh, get rid of all that stuff and just do this. And if you go into a monastery, you will, I haven't been in a real monastery, but I've done kind of monastic practice. And you go there without your stuff, except maybe your books. Because life works better, that life works better without your stuff.